Greetings one and all to another Dark Rider pony analysis. I am the Nightmare Rider, Mage of Mine, reminding you, as always, that even a cheeseburger can be deconstructed to its original source. When developing a story, the most important thing is to establish a good foundation for your characters. We are given the basic strengths and weaknesses, relating all parts of their personality to this, so that they can feel like believable and consistent characters. In other words, we need to relate their current actions to something they have done before. If a character is behaving in an extreme manner, we need to know what about their past makes it such a sensitive topic for them. An example of good character setup will be Yuto Sakurai from Kamen Rider Den-O. When we first meet him, he is a very tough and commanding presence, attempting to threaten and intimidate our lead protagonist, Ryotaro. However, when his imagined Deneb shows up, his personality is the complete opposite. Deneb is very polite and very civilized, looking after Yuto as if he would be a small child. This frequently causes the two to bicker, often ending with Yuto throwing a childish tantrum and curling up in the corner of his own time-travelling train, the Zero Liner. When it comes to Somepony to watch over me, the overprotective actions of Applejack break her character from the norm and ruin a lot of potential this episode could have had. Although it's not because of the notion that Applejack is overprotective of Applebloom. This does have some basic merit, considering how close-knit they are as a family and the fact that this is the first time Applebloom has had the household responsibilities to take care of all by herself. However, the problem is the foundation isn't nearly enough to justify Applejack's disproportionate reactions. The way Applejack is talking down to Applebloom the whole time is like she is a toddler who has just learned to talk. She is ignoring the context of Applebloom's words, twisting them to further evidence her own paranoia. This is a logical fallacy known as confirmation bias. It is where you start with a conclusion and use every tiny shred of evidence to prove this theory correct, ignoring all evidence against this conclusion. In this case, Applejack has already started from the conclusion that Applebloom is completely incapable of looking after herself without getting harmed in some way. Once she sees the mess Applebloom has made, she jumps to the conclusion that this could result in Applebloom being seriously hurt in some fashion or another. This is a problem because we don't have any prior evidence from the character to explain why she would have a confirmation bias of this magnitude. Just because she feels a deep responsibility to look after Applebloom doesn't justify the fact she is going so far as to put pillows on rakes and bubble wrap the entire furniture. There is more evidence to the contrary of this behaviour too. On almost every other occasion Applejack and Applebloom have been together, they have had quite a healthy relationship with one another. The only time we've seen Applejack remotely protective of Applebloom, to the point where she wants to hold her back to avoid a threat, is bridal gossip. And even then it's still more justified, considering the moral panic over the mysterious Zecora we know almost nothing about. Since there are no clear signs that Applebloom was in any way harmed by the spillage, we don't have any reason to believe why Applejack would normally be so quick to jump off the deep end. Instead, we could have initially seen Applejack just have far milder worries and distrust, trying to constantly advise Applebloom on taking on smaller tasks, resulting in Applebloom taking more risky behaviour to show she is capable of being independent. The level of escalation would have given credence to Applejack's fears, thus justifying her level of protectiveness that she was enforcing on Applebloom. The problem becomes especially evident because of how lackluster the writing is in this episode's dialogue. There are many times where Applejack and Applebloom repeat the same lines over and over, continuously beating us over the head with the conflict. It just makes the problem worse because it's reinforcing how out of character Applejack is with her obsession over Applebloom's safety. It's not all doom and gloom, thankfully, since there are a number of moments between the three Cutie Mark Crusaders that, conversely to Applejack, actually build on their characters as a whole. Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo are both very supportive of Applebloom, since they have each experienced a similar conflict that Applebloom is dealing with, relating to a parental adult role model in their life, and resolving conflicts between them so that they are all on the same page about how they feel towards one another. So the CMC's plan to occupy Applejack's attention so that Applebloom can escape is not only a great way for these characters to deal with the conflict, but also provides some great comedic moments that have otherwise been lost. The false start of the songs initially made me cringe at how bad it was, but then I realised it was intentional due to how fast Scootaloo cut off Apple Bloom. It is a clever self-aware gag that shows how much potential the writers have to understand and subvert conventional tropes while not overdoing it as some shows tend to do. I especially love Scootaloo's line about how Apple Bloom does everything with sass, adding to her development with respect to how well they understand one another. Then we get to the climactic scene with the Chimera, and this is where the episode once again starts going off the rails. Much like before, the concept of a fire swamp and chimeras are not in themselves bad. After all, this is a fantasy world, where just outside of Ponyville we have a Everfree Forest, which is filled with many such beasts. It is more so the execution that becomes clumsy. The transition is used as a joke for Applejack to look like she's being overprotective again, but actually had some legitimate worries about how Apple Bloom was going in unprepared. But because we are never given so much as a passing mention before, the transition feels awkward and brings up the question of why Applejack didn't have such preparations to begin with. The fight with the Chimera itself was entertaining to watch, but the words that the Chimera constantly speaks undermines it. The key phrase that makes it so frustrating is how the Chimera mentions that he is annoyed by his sister constantly watching over his shoulder, something Apple Bloom can relate to. But they never bring this up again, making it just another point of useless dialogue that does nothing to add to its potential character. We could have easily had Apple Bloom relate to the Chimera, coming to an understanding and showing Applejack that her obsessive behaviour could end up with wider consequences in a different context. But instead, it just becomes another generic monster that ends up partially justifying Applejack's paranoia. Even worse is the delivery of the moral, which fails in a similar fashion to how Feeling Pinky Keen ended. The case of the exact wording of this moral had an unfortunate implications that betrayed the original authorial intent. It's a mash between Applejack trying to scold Apple Bloom for her dangerous behaviour, but also congratulating her on overcoming the dangerous situation at the same time. The unfortunate implications come from making her sound like it was good for Apple Bloom to put herself in danger to get Applejack to realise she was being overprotective, rather than acknowledge it was because of Applejack's smothering that Apple Bloom was driven to do this to begin with. It was supposed to be finding the middle ground balance and recognising both behaviours as wrong, but falls short due to how little build-up there was for their actions before. Overall, this was an annoyingly mediocre episode. Not really as bad as Rainbow Falls or Simple Ways, but certainly worse than Bats. It does an incredibly poor job at giving a reasonable justification for Applejack to treat Apple Bloom like she's in constant danger, superfluous dialogue wasted so much good potential for character development, and the moral was so badly worded it ended up shooting itself in the foot. The good humour between the Cutie Mark Crusaders, along with the action and fighting with the Chimera, did give it plenty of great qualities, but not enough for me to award this episode with anything more than a C- grade. Until the next review, this is the Nightmare Rider, Major Mind, riding out.